I feel like I've been living in this virtual world forever, she said, her voice filled with a mix of sadness and acceptance. Some days I barely remember my life outside of here. She wasn't alone, lots of players were starting to feel the same way. They didn't seem as eager to win the game and escape as they used to be. In fact, not many players were even fighting at the front lines anymore. Only about 500 brave ones were left. It wasn't just because it was getting too scary, we were all just getting really used to this new life. I looked at her and she was lost in thought. The warm light of the lamp highlighted her stunning features. But what caught my attention was that she didn't quite look human. Her skin was ridiculously smooth, and her hair was super shiny. Yet it didn't even feel like I was looking at a video game character anymore. She seemed so real, so alive in this virtual space. It was weirdly easy to forget that she wasn't actually a living, breathing person. Imagine going back to the real world right now. It would probably feel super weird. The thought actually startled me. Did I even want to leave this virtual world behind? At first I had been desperate to escape the game. It was tough and scary, with its early morning wake-up calls, creepy dungeon crawls, and tricky puzzles to solve. But now that I'd gotten used to life in SAO, I wasn't so sure. Just as I was thinking about this, Asuna spoke up. I still want to go back, she said firmly, like she knew I was having doubts. Her words caught me off guard, and I looked up at her in surprise. Then she did something that didn't happen very often. She smiled at me. I know there's still a ton of stuff we need to do, I said, nodding in agreement. Asuna made a good point, we couldn't give up now, not when others were counting on us. I took a big gulp from my cup, trying to shake off my doubts. The top floor was still really far away, so I figured I could worry about it later. I looked at Asuna, feeling brave for a second. I wanted to thank her for everything, but before I could say anything, she made a weird face and started waving her hand in front of her nose. Whoa, stop, she said. I was confused. What's wrong? I asked. She laughed and said, you're giving me that look. The one where guys ask me to marry them. I was shocked. I'm really good at fighting, but when it comes to talking to girls, I'm totally clueless. I stood there with my mouth hanging open, but no words came out. I probably looked pretty silly. Asuna smiled at me and said, I'm going to take a guess. You don't really have any close friends in the game.
Do you?
I shrugged and replied, sorry for playing alone. She chuckled and said, but that's the best part of MMORPGs, making friends and working together. Her smile faded, and she looked at me with a serious expression, like an older sister or teacher. Have you ever thought about joining a guild? I was taken aback. No, Asuna's expression turned even more serious. I know that beta testers like you usually prefer to play solo. But things have been getting weird in the game. The monsters' patterns have been all over the place since we reached the 70th floor. I had noticed that too. It was like they were behaving in crazy, unpredictable ways. Here's the rewritten text. Imagine you're playing a game, and your computer starts making weird choices. Is it supposed to do that, or is it just figuring things out as it goes? Either way, it's going to be tough to deal with. Asuna gave me some advice. When you play alone, you can't handle surprises as easily. You can't always escape from trouble quickly. It's much safer to team up with others. I nodded. But I wasn't convinced. I'm careful enough, I said. I leave room for mistakes. Thanks for warning me, but I don't really do groups. My brain was telling me to shut up, but my mouth kept going. To be honest, when I team up with others, they usually just get in the way. As soon as I said that, a shiny silver knife appeared right in front of my face. It was Asuna's, and she was holding it perfectly still, thanks to a cool move called linear. Whoa, that was close. I didn't stand a chance. She was super fast, and her speed depended on how agile she was. I mean, I didn't even see her move. It was like magic. I threw up my hands in surrender, trying to look cool, despite being totally beaten.
Okay. You win,
I said with a frozen grin. She just gave me a serious stare, and put away her knife. But then she started spinning the blade around her fingers, which was actually pretty cool. What she said next totally caught me off guard. Now that we've got that settled, she said, I want you to team up with me. It turned out she was in charge of organizing big raids against tough bosses, and she wanted to see if I was as good as everyone said. Plus, she wanted to prove just how tough she really was. Here's the rewritten text, Asuna said with a grin. And this week, black is my lucky color. I was taken aback. What did that even mean? I tried to think of a good comeback. But my mind was a blank. What about your guild? I asked. Asuna just shrugged. We don't have to worry about leveling up right now. I tried again. What about your bodyguards? She waved her hand dismissively. I'll leave them behind. I picked up my teacup, hoping to stall for a moment. But it was empty. Asuna laughed and took it from me, refilling it with hot tea. To be honest, I was really tempted by her offer. Who wouldn't want to team up with the most amazing girl in Ankrad? But the more she smiled at me, the more I wondered what she was really up to. The better the deal seemed, the more suspicious I became. I wondered, why would Asuna want to hang out with me? Maybe she felt sorry for me because I'm always alone and seemed pretty down. My negative thoughts got the best of me, and I said something that changed everything. The frontier can be really dangerous, you know. The knife in her hand sparkled even brighter, and I quickly nodded in agreement. As a clear mid, as someone who fights on the front lines to help move the game forward. I'm not exactly a star player. I hesitated for a moment before speaking up again. Oh, okay. Fine. I'll meet you at the 74th floor gate tomorrow at 9 a.m. Asuna put down her knife and smiled like she was sure of herself. After we finished eating, I didn't want to overstay my welcome in her apartment, so I said goodbye as quickly as possible. It's not every day you get to hang out with someone as cool as Asuna, and I didn't want to mess it up. Asuna walked with me down the stairs, a hint of a smile on her face. Thanks for the food, by the way, she said. I grinned back. No problem. We should do this again sometime, but I'm not sure I'll ever find that weird ingredient again. Asuna chuckled. You don't need special ingredients to make great food. You just need to know what you're doing. As we stepped outside, Asuna looked up at the sky. It was pitch black, but there were no twinkling stars to light it up. Instead, a huge, gloomy ceiling of rock and metal loomed above us, hundreds of feet high. I followed her gaze, feeling a shiver run down my spine. I wonder if this is really the world that Kaiba wanted to create. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Asuna didn't answer, but I knew she was thinking the same thing. Where was Kaiba now? Was he hiding somewhere, watching us navigate his crazy virtual world? There were no answers, just the darkness of the sky, and the weight of the ceiling above us. What was going on inside Kaiba's head? We'd made it past the super violent and crazy beginning of this game, and now things were pretty calm and quiet. But was that what Kaiba wanted? I had no clue. Asuna moved a little closer to me, and I felt a tiny bit of warmth on my arm. It was weird. I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination, or if the game was actually making me feel it. It's hard to believe it's been almost 2 years since this nightmare started. The game ASCII began on November 6, 2022. Now it's late October 2024, and we still haven't been rescued. There aren't even any messages from the outside world. All we can do is keep surviving, one day at a time, trying to make our way to the top of this virtual world. Another day in Ankrad had come to an end, but we knew we'd have to keep fighting if we wanted to stay alive. The adventure ahead was a total mystery. We had no idea where we were going or what we'd find at the end of the game. The journey would be super long and tough, and the finish line seemed really far away, but I wasn't about to give up. I gazed up at the metal ceiling, my mind racing with all the amazing worlds we still had to explore. It was 7,000 a.m. and the weather in the game was set to lightly cloudy. A thick fog still surrounded the city, making everything look like it was bathed in a cool yellow light. According to the calendar in Ankrad, the world we were playing in, it was now the month of the ash tree. That meant autumn was in full swing. The air felt crisp and cool, just like on a real fall morning. I was excited to see what lay ahead, even if it was still a bit unclear. Bring it on. The cool air felt amazing on my skin. It was definitely my favorite time of year. But even with the refreshing breeze, I couldn't shake off the blues. I stood in the teleport gate square on the 74th floor, waiting for my friend Asuna to show up. The night before had been a total sleep disaster. I had tossed and turned in bed back in Algate, unable to catch some zuzzes until super late, like after 3 a.m. You'd think that in a game like SAO there would be a magic sleep button to make you doze off instantly. But nope, that's not how it works. On the other hand, SAO does have a pretty cool forced alarm feature. It's like a wake-up call that blasts your favorite music to get you up and moving. The only problem is, it can't stop you from hitting the snooze button and falling back asleep. My alarm blared to life at 8:50 a.m., and I managed to drag myself out of bed. In the world of Sessio, everyone knew that taking a bath or changing clothes wasn't really necessary. The nerve gear made it possible, but it just didn't feel like a real bath. Plus it used up a lot of energy. So, just 20 seconds after waking up, I was already wearing my armor and heading to Algade's teleport gate. I was still trying to shake off the sleepiness though. I had plans to meet Asuna, and I didn't want to be late. But as the minutes ticked by, she's not coming, I thought to myself. It was already 10 minutes past the hour, and there was no sign of her. I watched as player after player ran out of the gate and into the labyrinth. I didn't have anything else to do, so I checked my menu. I looked at the map of the labyrinth, which I already knew by heart, and checked how my skills were coming along. But then I had a weird thought. I wished I had a handheld game console to pass the time. It was crazy. I wanted to play a video game inside a video game. That was just too much. Just as I was feeling really frustrated, the teleport gate flashed blue again. I glanced over, not expecting anything exciting to happen, but then I heard someone shout, "Atreya, look out," and another person yelled, "What nah?" Normally when you come out of the teleport gate, you land on your feet, but this player was different. They appeared in mid-air, flying straight at me. I was totally caught off guard. There was no time to dodge or get ready for the impact. All I could do was stand there and wonder, what's going on? We crashed into each other and landed hard on the ground. My head bounced off the stones, and it hurt. If we were anywhere else, I would have been seriously injured. Luckily we were in a safe area. As I tried to figure out what just happened, I realized that this person must have jumped into a magical portal without stopping. They came out the other side with the same speed and momentum, which is why we collided so hard. I was feeling dizzy, but I managed to lift my right hand to push the person off me. As my hand made contact, I was surprised by how nice it felt. The material was soft, yet firm. I squeezed a few more times, trying to figure out what it was. Suddenly a loud scream pierced my ear, and my head bounced off the ground again. "A blast!" the person yelled. I was shocked and confused. What was going on? I snapped back to reality, and suddenly I was sitting up straight. That's when I saw her, a girl player, sitting on the ground in front of me. She was wearing a knight's uniform with red threads on a white background, a short skirt, and a shiny silver sword at her side. But what really caught my attention was the angry look on her face. Her cheeks were bright red, and her arms were crossed tightly over her chest. At first I didn't notice what I was holding on to. But then it hit me and I realized I was in trouble. My mind went blank, and I just sat there with my mouth hanging open. My hand opened and closed like a fish out of water. I tried to play it cool and said, Hey, morning Asuna." But instead of calming her down, my words seemed to make her even angrier. Her eyes blazed with fury, and I could tell I was in for a world of trouble. I locked eyes with someone who seemed to be deciding whether to pull out their weapon. My heart started racing, and I thought about making a run for it. But before I could move, the teleport gate flashed again. Asuna jumped up and spun around, quickly moving behind me. "What's going on?" she whispered. I was just as confused as she was. The gate got brighter and brighter, and then a new person appeared. This time they came out standing up straight, not stumbling around like some people do when they teleport. As the light faded, I saw a face I recognized. He was wearing a fancy white cape with a red symbol on it. The uniform of the Knights of the Blood. His armor was super flashy, with too many decorations, and he carried a huge two-handed sword. It was a bit too much, but it definitely made him look like a serious warrior. Here's the rewritten text. I recognized the guard with long hair, who had helped Asuna the day before. His name was Kuradel, I think. As he walked out of the gate and saw us standing together, his eyebrows scrunched up in a frown. He looked pretty young, probably in his early 20s, but the deep lines on his face made him seem older. He gritted his teeth so hard that I could almost hear them grinding. "Lady Asuna, you can't behave like this," he shouted, his high-pitched voice trembling with anger. I could tell this guy was trouble. His beady eyes sparkled with fury as he spoke. "Come on, Lady Asuna, let's go back to the guild," he said. But Asuna was not having it. She sounded super angry, and I could feel her tension behind me. "No way, I'm not working for the guild today," she shot back. "And what were you doing, hanging out in front of my house this morning, anyway?" Kuradel sneered. I had a feeling something like this would happen. Here's the rewritten text. I've been keeping watch here in Selmberg, every morning for a month now, I said. But Kuradil just smirked and acted like he owned the place. Asuna and I were both shocked by his attitude. She finally spoke up, her voice firm. Wait, the commander didn't tell you to do that. Did he? Kuradil just shrugged. My job is to protect you. And that means keeping an eye on you all the time. Asuna's eyes widened in anger. No way, that's not true, she exclaimed. Kuradil's face turned red with annoyance. He pushed me aside and grabbed Asuna's arm. Come on. Asuna, be reasonable. Let's go back to headquarters, he said, his voice low and angry. Asuna took a step back, looking scared by the intensity in his voice. She looked at me with super pleading eyes. Up until then I was thinking about running away from the trouble. But her eyes made me do something unexpected. My hand reached out and grabbed Kuradil's wrist. Not too hard, but just hard enough. I didn't want to trigger the town's security system that stops bad guys. I said, sorry buddy. I'm borrowing your vice commander for the day. It was a pretty cheesy line, but I had to go with it now. Kuradil finally noticed me and jerked his arm away. His face turned red with anger. You're an insolent brat, he yelled, his teeth clenched in rage. Something was off about Kurito's face, even for a guy who made crazy expressions all the time. Don't worry, I've got Asuna's back, he said calmly. We're not gonna fight that boss today. You can head back to your guild HQ. But Kuradil wasn't having it. And no way, I'm not leaving Lady Asuna with some nobody like you. He spluttered, I'm a real member of the Knights of the Blood, and I won't let you take care of her. Kurito just smirked. I'll do a better job than you, he said, which wasn't exactly the nicest thing to say. Kuradil's face turned white with anger. Oh yeah, well if you're so tough, prove it. His hand was shaking as he opened his window, ready for a fight. A message popped up in front of me, but I already knew what it said. Kurda wanted to duel me one-on-one. The message asked if I accepted the challenge. There were 2 buttons, yes and no. I also had some options to choose from. I looked over at Asuna, who was standing next to me. She couldn't see the message, but she seemed to know what was going on. I thought she would tell us to forget about it, but instead, she nodded quickly. Her face looked serious. Are you sure this is a good idea? I whispered. Won't it cause problems in the guild? Asuna whispered back. Don't worry, I'll talk to the commander and take care of it. I nodded and clicked the yes button. Then, I chose an option called First Strike. This meant that if I could hit Kurado first, I would win the duel. Here's the rewritten text. In this duel, the person who landed a powerful hit first or reduced their opponent's health to 50% would be declared the winner. Suddenly a message popped up. You've agreed to a one-on-one duel with Kuradil. A countdown timer started ticking away. We had just 1 minute before the battle began. When the clock struck 0, the town's protection would fade away, and we'd fight until only one of us was left standing. Kuradil seemed to think he had Asuna's permission for this duel, but it didn't sound like she had actually agreed. Watch closely, Lady Asuna, he shouted, his voice sounding a bit crazy. He dramatically pulled out his enormous sword. Making a big show of it, Asuna took a few steps back to give us some space. I followed her cue and readied my own weapon, preparing for the fight to come. I gazed at my opponent's sword and couldn't help but feel a little intimidated. As a top player in an elite guild, his two-handed sword was massive, way bigger than mine. It was also super fancy, with awesome designs and patterns etched into the metal. My sword, on the other hand, was plain and average-sized. We faced off about 5 yards apart, ready to start our duel. Even though the countdown hadn't finished yet, the crowd was already gathering around us. This wasn't surprising, since we were standing right next to the main teleport gate in the town center. Lots of people knew who we were: me, Kurito the solo player, and my opponent from the co-guild. Someone in the crowd shouted, "It's Kurito the solo versus co-guild player. Duel time." The crowd erupted into cheers, excited to see what would happen next. The crowd went wild as my friend Kuradil and I faced off in a duel. They cheered and whistled, thinking it was just a friendly competition to see who was the better fighter. But what they didn't know was that there was more to this fight than just testing our skills. As the countdown began, the noise of the crowd started to fade away. I felt my focus sharpen, like when I'm about to battle a tough monster in the game. My eyes were locked on Kuradil, and I could tell he was getting annoyed with all the attention from the spectators. I studied how he held his sword and the way he stood, looking for any clues that might give away his next move. When you're fighting another player, like Kuradil, you have to pay close attention to these little details. It's not like fighting against the computer-controlled monsters in SAO where you can just react to their attacks. With a real person you need to be able to read their movements and anticipate what they'll do next. I was ready to do just that. Imagine you're in a duel with another player. If you give away your next move, you'll probably lose. Kuradil was getting ready to attack. He held his sword at waist level and leaned forward a bit. This made it look like he was going to strike upwards. But maybe he was just faking it. I held my sword low and relaxed, trying to make him think I'd strike quickly from down low. The trick is to bluff your way to winning. You have to trust your instincts and use what you've learned from experience. The countdown started, and when it got close to 0, I shut the window. The duel was about to begin. The crowd's cheers were gone. All I could focus on was Kuradil. His eyes darted back and forth between the countdown timer and me. Then he froze, his whole body tense and ready. Suddenly a bright purple sign flashed to life between us. Duel, that was my cue. I sprang into action at the same time, my boots sparking as I blasted forward. The air rumbled around me as I cut through it. Kuradil wasn't far behind, he moved just a split second after I did. But he looked totally caught off guard. Instead of getting ready to block his attack, I was charging straight at him. I had a feeling I knew what he'd do first. Avalanche, a powerful upward dash with his huge sword. And sure enough, that's exactly what he did. Imagine facing an attack that's almost impossible to defend against. If you tried to block it, the hit would be so strong that you wouldn't be able to counterattack quickly. And if you dodged, the attacker would have plenty of time to spin around and get ready for their next move. This was a nightmare scenario. Unless you were a monster. I knew this attack was coming, so I chose Sonic Leap, a super fast upward charge attack. Our moves would clash in mid-air. The problem was, my opponent's attack was way stronger than mine. When two attacks collide, the more powerful one usually wins out. Normally my sword would get knocked aside, and even though it would weaken his blow a bit, he'd probably still come out on top. This wasn't looking good for me. I wasn't trying to hurt Kuradil himself, just defend against his attack. We clashed in a flash, moving ridiculously fast. But for some reason time seemed to slow down for me. I'm not sure if it was the game system giving me a boost, or just my own instincts kicking in. Either way, I could see every tiny move Kuradil made as he swung his giant sword at me. The blade was glowing with orange light and looked seriously deadly. It was clear that Kuradil was a skilled player. Maybe even one of the best. His attack came faster than I expected. And if that sword hit me, it would hurt big time. This wasn't just a friendly duel, one wrong move could mean disaster. Kuradil's face was red with excitement. He thought he had already won. But I had a surprise for him. My sword moved lightning fast in a diagonal swipe, shining with a yellow-green light. It crashed into Kuradil's massive great sword just as it was about to hit me. Sparks flew everywhere from the impact. When two swords clash, there are only two possible outcomes. One of them wins, or they both break. And that's exactly what happened. My sword struck the weak spot on Kuradil's great sword at just the right angle, with enough force to destroy it. This kind of thing hardly ever happens, but I knew it was possible if the timing was perfect and my sword hit the exact spot where his was most vulnerable. And I was right, his sword shattered into pieces.